Tuesday Newsday.
When you broke my heart, that I had to come again and show you that I'm with you. Lied to me. All those times I said that I love you, you lied to me. Yes, I tried. You lied.
Didn't you? Oh man, not another day like last Tuesday.
The big news.
News? What news?
Sorry.
What?
All right, Lane. But this is beyond news. This is like Pearl Harbor or the Kennedy assassination. It's like not even news, it's total shock.
Hello and welcome to this Tuesday Newsday 416. The learning goals should look familiar to determine two or more central ideas of a text and analyze their development over the course of that text, including how they interact and build on one another. So what is the central idea? The scale should look familiar to what we've used in the past. A 4 means that you can identify the central idea or ideas, the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and how the ideas build on one another. A 3 means that you can identify the central idea or ideas and the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point. A 2 means that you can identify the central idea, but you're not really getting to that evidence point. And a 1 means that you are unsure of how to find the central idea. To receive a unit and a half for today's class, you must highlight or underline the main idea, circle the evidence that the author uses to support his or her point, and put a box around any other central ideas in the text. The 4 skills that we will work on today, as usual, identifying the topic. Reminder, the topic is not the main idea. We will talk about that difference at the end of the article today. Be able to summarize your story in 10 to 12 words. The first and last sentence, what are those of the article? Typically that is an introduction and a recap of the main idea. And then if the author feels that repeating those ideas is important, that repetition probably leads to main idea. Our article today is Teens Aren't Socializing in the Real World and They're Lonely. It was written for the USA Today on the 4th of April. It's got a picture of Justin Bieber on the cover holding his puppy. It begins like this. Teens whose FaceTime with friends is mostly on their phones are the loneliest of all. But even those who mix in real-world socializing with social media are still increasingly isolated, a report out March 20th shows. Loneliness isn't just an age thing, it's generational, says the author of the study, San Diego State University psychologist Jean Twiggy. The percent of high school seniors who say they often felt lonely increased from 26% in 2012 to 39% in 2017. The number of 12th graders who said they have felt left out also increased from 30% in 2012 to 38% in 2017. The data and study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships are from nationally representative surveys of 8.2 million U.S. adolescents between 1976 and 2017. The study comes as the topic of loneliness gains considerable interest in the healthcare field because of its link to mental and physical health, as well as life expectancy. Research out last year from the insurer Cigna found teens reported being loneliest, but it wasn't clear whether that was due to age or being different from a different generation. We find it is a generational difference since loneliness increased among teens from 2012 to 2017, says Twiggy, who is also the author of iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. The increase in loneliness might be due to how teens spend their leisure time, Twiggy says. When compared to teens from earlier decades, Gen Z are less likely to get together with friends in person, go to parties, go out with friends, date, ride in cars for fun, go to shopping malls, or go to the movies, she reported. A lot of time alone. Rebecca Anginello of Grand Island, New York, was alone in her suffering when she died by suicide at 14 in December of 2015. Her father, Rob, says there is no cause that led his daughter to take her life, though he believes social media played a role. With social media, there's an appearance of having all this closeness, but we have a lot of time alone, he says. Anginello cites the book A Mind at Home with Itself by the author Byron Katie, which he said helped him get through the grieving process. It wouldn't resonate as much for teenagers, he says. At that age, they can't really process the mind being at home with itself, he says. For Rebecca, who had a good group of friends, sitting with her phone and people not getting back to her was particularly painful, she says. Other statistics from Twiggy's study. In the late 1970s, 52% of 12th graders said they got together with their friends almost every day, but in 2017, only 28% did. In 2017, teens got together with their friends 68 fewer times a year than they did in the early 90s, and high school seniors went on dates 32 fewer times a year. Generation Z 10th graders went to approximately 17 fewer parties a year than Gen X 10th graders did, which is like, Gen X is like growing up in the 80s, sort of, or growing up in the 90s, kind of born in that 1980 range. The perils of social isolation. As a heartthrob for those of Gen Z and older, musician Nick Jonas might seem an unlikely spokesperson on the perils of social isolation, but he's doing so for Cigna. In a recent interview, he said balancing type 1 diabetes with the challenges of his new solo career several years ago was difficult, but not as hard as it might have been. I was really lucky to have my brothers, my family, and my touring family, said Jonas, who recently resumed performing with his brothers. I never felt that sense of real loneliness. Social media is an incredibly powerful tool, says Jonas, but he notes it can be isolating at times. Today's high school seniors spend more than an hour less a day interacting with friends in person than Gen X did in the late 1980s. Melissa Sporn, a McLean, Virginia child psychologist who has 2 teenage children, cites overscheduling that limits socialization and parents' efforts to protect kids from danger outside, which leads to more inside time on computers and phones. Online activities hits us twice. Once as a distraction and or substitution for real social interaction, and then again as a representation via social media of all the things we aren't doing and should be engaged in, thus leaving us feeling lonely. And FOMO, Sporn says, referring to the fear of missing out. Twiggy says teens' increasing isolation is not caused by more time spent on work or homework, because the data show they now spend less time on paid work and about the same amount of time or less on homework and extracurricular activities as they did in the 1980s and 1990s. Sporn disagrees. Our students in high school are taking college classes, and there's a significant uptick in the amount of homework our kids have compared to just 15 years ago, she says. Preserving social interaction. Cigna's annual Global Well-Being Survey, Well and Beyond, out March 25th, will report that U.S. millennials, members of Generation Y, who are 25 to 34, that's me, appear to favor their smartphone and gaming more than socializing with friends, and spending more time on digital devices and gaming leads to isolate more by avoiding in-person interaction, Cigna found. Cigna's questionnaire on loneliness includes ways to connect more with other people. Anginello says that's needed. Effort has to be made in order to preserve some of the social interaction. There are major drawbacks when it is electronic assisted, he says. Social media can give us the impression that the lives of others are so good and can make us feel like we are missing out or our lives are not as good as that of others, says Anginello. There are so many factors at work here, and the emphasis these days seems to be more on achieving and accomplishing, partly due to the demands of society rather than the time we used to have to just be children, just to relax and be who we authentically are. There is much more pressure now. So here we are at the worksheet. I'm going to write down a sentence here. That does not mean that this is where it should go, but I'm going to write it down just because it's at the top, and you have to decide where it should go. The statement is this: because of social media, teens are experiencing more loneliness, spell this word correctly, than generations previous. Should also add, and societal changes. And by this, I mean the danger of the outside, keeping kids away from strangers, thus being more indoors, was a direct quote in the story, as well as high school kids taking college classes, which kind of gets us to the last sentence, which we'll write down here when we get to it, about there being so much more pressure now. But this is the statement: because of social media and societal changes, teens now are experiencing more loneliness than generations previous. Do you believe that is identifying the topic, or is that the main idea of the article? Where should this statement go? Should I cut it from here and place it here? Or should I cut it from there and place it there? You decide. So in fact, just to kind of set that apart, what I'm going to do is make that blue. Summarizing the story. Teens are, I don't even want to say teens, I want to say Generation Z is lonelier than, spell that right again, generations before it. Make that red. And here I'm going to pull the first and last sentence. So here we have the first and last sentence. The first is, teens whose FaceTime is with friends is mostly on their phones are the loneliest of all, but even those who mix in real world socializing with social media still are increasingly isolated. A report out March 20 shows. And then the last sentence is, there is much more pressure now. Repeated ideas. I think that idea of loneliness in this generation is, it's not going to let me get there. There it is. Get rid of that. In Gen Z, how about the idea that there is more pressure now and societal changes? Well, that's kind of why there is more pressure now. Let's also take a look at kind of the expectations because of cell phones and social media. As being the repeated ideas. And finally, the main idea of the article might be this one in blue, or it might be this something else. What do you think? Do you think that this what I have in blue should go to the main idea and the topic is different, or do you think that should stay? You decide, and you write that where you think it should fit. Thank you for listening in, and when you are done here, you will complete the vocab and earn a unit and a half. And as always, ciao for now.